What order should I put my guitar pedals in? Does the order even make a difference? What do you mean by order? What's a pedal?
Hi, I'm Chris McQueen. Join me as we explore these and many other questions in today's episode of Pedalsploration.
Pedalsploration, exploring the magical world of guitar pedals.
Today we're going to talk about what order to put your guitar pedals in and what effect that has on your sound. When we talk about ordering your pedals, what we're really talking about is signal path. The signal path is the flow of the sound from where it starts at your instrument all the way to where it ends. In this case, we'll say it ends when you plug into your amp, even though really all kinds of stuff can happen to your sound after that point, but we're only really concerned with pedals here on
Pedalsploration.
Before you plug any pedals into your signal path, it's a good idea to go straight into your amp and dial in a tone that you like. Let's get a nice clean sound, not too bassy, not too trebly. That way your pedals have a blank canvas to work on. We'll talk later about how to use pedals if you want to use amp distortion. Okay, so now that we have that, let's add some pedals into our signal path. Each pedal has an input and an output, which we link together using these short patch cables, a system which is basically exactly the same as what we used to use for our telephone switchboard operators back in olden times. You also need to provide power to each pedal, whether that's an internal battery or a plug into the wall. So let's say I know I want to use tremolo, overdrive, and reverb, but I'm not sure which should go first, second, and third. If I'm only going to turn one pedal on at a time, it won't matter at all what the order is. The signal path is the exact same in any of these different arrangements, but as soon as you turn on more than one pedal at the same time, then the order might start to matter. Think about the signal path. As the signal goes through the first pedal, it gets affected, it changes, and now it's not the same sound as it was before. The second pedal has no access to that previous sound, it only knows the new affected sound, and it might behave differently than it would have if it had been receiving the original clean signal. Let's see how this works in practice.
Experimentation.
Let's hear the difference between overdrive before tremolo versus tremolo before overdrive. When the overdrive is first, the tremolo will receive an overdriven sound and then create a tremolo effect on top of that. The final result is the volume alternating up and down, but the amount of distortion will stay constant. In the reverse order, the overdrive pedal is receiving a sound that is already alternating up and down in volume. What happens now is that the amount of distortion will actually change as the tremolo is turning the volume up and down. That's because overdrive pedals distort less when they receive less signal. You can get the same effect by using your guitar knob to turn your volume down going into an overdrive pedal. So the same thing is happening automatically with this tremolo pedal. The final result is not only an alternating volume, but an alternating amount of distortion too, giving it almost like a wah kind of effect. Just for fun, let's hear what this sounds like with a fuzz pedal instead of an overdrive to get an even more extreme version of this. Anyway, back to what we were doing. Let's do the same experiment, but now with overdrive and reverb. Let's start with overdrive first. Thinking about the signal path, the sound will go through the overdrive pedal, become distorted, and then that distorted sound will be echoed, as if you were playing a distorted guitar in a cave. The other way around, the clean sound will be echoed, and then that entire sound, including the echo, will be sent through the overdrive pedal and the whole thing will be distorted. This is like you recorded yourself playing a clean guitar in a cave and then took that recording and put it through a distortion pedal. The overall sound is kind of messier this way, like all of the reverb is getting distorted and it's kind of clashing with the notes that you're currently playing in a way that doesn't happen the other way around. I like it. It's a less common sound, but it's definitely really interesting. And I should say all of these differences are going to be a lot more noticeable if you're turning the knobs up on each of these pedals really high. If you're, using just a little bit of overdrive, a little bit of reverb, you might not even notice the difference. Okay, so now going back to our original 3 pedals that we were considering the order of, let's try tremolo with reverb. Starting with the tremolo first, again thinking about the signal path, the sound will go through the tremolo pedal, the volume will go up and down, and then that wavy sound will be sent through the reverb pedal and the entire thing will be echoed. So again, you can imagine playing like a tremolo guitar sound in a big cave or big church or something like that, if you want to be less Batman about it. The other way around, the sound will get reverby first, and then that entire reverby sound will be sent through the tremolo pedal, which will change the volume of the whole thing up and down. So in the first version, there's never a complete dip in the volume because the reverb pedal is going to kind of put like a nice blanket over everything. And in the second version, when you stop playing, you can hear this tremolo effect continue. I'm kind of a big fan of the second way of doing this, and actually what I really like to do is to put both a delay and a reverb pedal before the tremolo. I can then use like a changing tremolo to make a cool effect. And just to drive the point home, you can hear how this effect doesn't work at all if you put the tremolo before your delay and reverb. Another way to think about pedal order for those of you who use Photoshop or anything like that is that it's basically the exact same thing as layer order. You can see here I have an image with 2 different adjustment layers on top. If I swap them around, it will change the way the image looks, even though I'm not changing what the layers themselves are doing. That's because whichever layer comes first changes the information, and the next layer only has access to the new information and nothing else. So here, just like with pedals, the order can really matter. And yes, this is a shameless plug for my Patreon, which you should consider joining. Okay, so hopefully you're starting to get the idea here, and I'm not going to go through every iteration of every possible pedal because, to be honest, sometimes it doesn't really make a huge difference. But there are definitely a few things that I've learned through the course of my own pedalsplorations through the years.
Chris's learnings.
Volume pedal. There's really only 2 considerations with the volume pedal. Do you want to put it before or after your overdrive gain stuff? And do you want to put it before or after your delay reverb stuff? With the overdrive pedal, if you put the volume pedal first, it will basically act as the exact same thing as your guitar's volume knob. So as you turn the volume pedal down, it'll make the overdrive pedal not just quieter, but actually cleaner. So that can be really useful if you want that kind of control over the amount of distortion that you're using from moment to moment. Putting them the other way around, your sound will always be fully distorted whether the volume pedal is up or down. This is actually pretty convenient in practice because you can use a fully distorted sound at a slightly lower volume and kind of mix yourself with the group in an interactive way. And if you want to clean up the sound, you've always got your guitar's volume knob that you can use just like we were showing before. Or if you're a fan of this channel and you've seen our episode about playing with your feet, then you can just use your foot to turn down the gain. With delay and reverb, if we put the volume pedal at the end, that means that the sound hits the delay and reverb pedals at full volume, and then we have control with the volume pedal over the trails of all of those sounds. So that can be useful if you need clean cutoffs, but it also means that you'll always hear the attack from all of your notes. If we flip this around and put the volume pedal first, we don't have any control over those echoes, but now that means that we can hit a chord quite strongly with the volume pedal down and then gradually move the volume pedal up, which means that you can do those fancy jazz swells and whale sounds. Anyway, so in conclusion, to get the most out of the volume pedal, I will usually put it after my overdrive stuff, but before my delay reverb stuff. And other than that, it doesn't really matter that much as far as I can tell. The tuner. When it comes to the tuner, the best thing to do is to run it out of the specific tuner output of a volume pedal. This takes it out of the chain altogether, and it also means that you can leave it on and just pull your volume pedal down to tune. But if you aren't playing with a volume pedal, you can pretty much put the tuner wherever. It might make the most sense to put it at the very end, that way you have the option to mute everything just in case your pedals decide to start making some crazy sounds. Just remember to turn off any pitch modulation pedals you might have on at the time you're trying to tune, because that's not going to work very well. Multiple distortion pedals. Let's talk about stacking multiple distortion pedals. And throughout this whole thing, I'm kind of using the terms overdrive, distortion, and gain pretty much interchangeably, and for the purposes of what we're talking about right now, you can also throw in fuzz. It can be really nice to use more than one distortion type of pedal at the same time. It gives you tones that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise, and especially if you're going for something that's really saturated and with lots of sustain. It's kind of hard to get that without using more than one distortion pedal sometimes. And when you're doing this, the order really does make a big difference. So let's hear what it sounds like to do overdrive into fuzz. In this arrangement, the final sound isn't terribly different whether or not I even turn on the overdrive pedal. It gives it a slightly more mid-rangey sound, and it gives it a little more sustain, but it doesn't change that much. That's because we're ending with the fuzz pedal, so it kind of has the final word on how everything is going to sound. The other way around, we hit the fuzz first and then end with the more rounded off, smoothed out overdrive sound. Either way can be useful, it just depends on if you want a more kind of nasally fuzz sound or if you want a bigger, smoother, rounder sound. The pedal that comes at the end is going to have more of a lasting effect on the overall sound, and similarly the volume knob of the final pedal will act as the true volume knob. The volume knob of the first pedal will affect how much signal is entering the second pedal, which can change the amount of distortion, but it won't actually change the amount of overall volume all that much. Octave. I've noticed that if I'm using an octave pedal with distortion, it really has to come first in order for it to sound right. I think that's because you kind of want to establish that octave sound and then distort the whole thing as one unit. For whatever reason, if you make the distortion sound happen first and then put it into the octave pedal, it kind of sounds like a separate sound, like you've got almost like a distorted regular sound and then a cleaner lower octave. putting effects after delay. Finally, let's explore some fun sounds that you can get by putting some effects after your delay pedal. We already talked about using a tremolo pedal after your delay, but let's talk about envelope filters. For this, I'll be using the dist wah pedal from the Korg PME40X, which we explored in great depth in our last episode of Pedalsploration. An envelope filter is an effect that opens or closes a filter based on how loud the input is. So if you put an envelope filter after a delay with lots of repeats that get softer and softer over time, this will have a changing effect on the envelope filter. But first, let's try it the other way around. We're going to go envelope filter into the delay pedal. Things get more interesting if we flip them around. Those get softer and softer over time, changing the filter. You can get a similar effect using a wah pedal. This is pretty much the same thing, just instead of it being automatically changed by the decay of the delay, you're just sort of manually changing the filter with your foot. Or not manually, I guess, just pedally? Foot is podiatry? Pedally changing it.
Pedalsploration.
In fact, you can really do this with kind of any modulation effect that changes gradually over time. I think I first started getting into this from listening to Radiohead recordings.
Conventional wisdom.
Okay, so blah blah blah, there's a bunch of different options, you can do all sorts of different things, but
What's the right order?
just tell me what the normal order is so I don't suck. I get it. In fact, I was gonna try to start this whole thing with like the normal way to do things and kind of go from there, but it's kind of a tricky question to answer. I mean, this is art, so there's no right way to do things anyway. And the more you try to nail down the normal way to do things, the more it seems like you kind of run into exceptions. I think maybe it's the wrong question. Maybe we can't answer what the right order is, but we can talk about what the most natural sounding order is. Earlier I talked about imagining playing a guitar in a cave to kind of get an intuitive understanding of how your reverb pedal will work. We can take that metaphor even further. I kind of think that all of these pedals and effects that we're using are really just an attempt to imitate the original way to make melodic sounds, which is of course singing. So let's think about the signal path, if you will, of your voice when you're singing. The first thing that happens is your diaphragm and lungs decide the general tone and volume of your voice. So that's your volume pedal, distortion. If you're singing so loud that you're basically growling or screaming, that's pretty much what a distortion pedal does. The next thing that happens is the shape of your mouth will affect the vowel sound, which is basically what a filter pedal or a wah pedal does. After that, you might use vibrato, whether in pitch or volume, to give your note a wavy texture. That's basically what all types of modulation pedals do, whether that's chorus, vibrato, tremolo, phaser, other ones that I can't think of right now. And then finally, the sound that you make is out of your mouth, out of your control, and bouncing off the surfaces of whatever room that you're in, whether that's a hall or a bedroom. So that's your time-based effects like reverb and delay. So there you go. Gain stuff, filter stuff, modulation stuff, time stuff. There, we did it. You can skip the rest of this video. No need to go on an artistic, creative journey, but right off the bat, there's so many caveats. As I said before, I think most people tend to put the volume pedal after all of the gain stuff. That way you can get a fully distorted sound even at a low volume. There's not really like a good singing in a cave explanation for that. It's just sort of a practical way to mix yourself in a live setting. Also, there's not really consensus on wah placement before or after overdrive. That one's kind of up for grabs. I mean, same for EQ. You can even get an overdrive pedal that has an EQ in it. Also, a lot of modulation pedals actually sound really good going before your overdrive pedal. That's because a lot of our earliest legendary recordings using modulation pedals were from guitar players that didn't even necessarily use overdrive pedals. They just got their overdrive by turning their amps up really, really loud until the amp itself was overdriving. Speaking of which, what about using amp distortion? The gain stuff is supposed to be at the beginning of the chain, not at the end. So if I took this setup and just plug it straight into an amp and try to use amp distortion, it's gonna kind of muddy up all of my effects. In this case, the best thing to do is to use an amp that has an effects loop. A tube amp actually has two sections, the preamp section and the power amp section. The preamp section is typically where most of the amp distortion happens. So some amps, like the Hot Rod Deluxe for example, gives you the option to put pedals in between the preamp and the power amp sections, essentially allowing you to use your amp distortion before some of your pedals. So in this situation, you would run some of your pedals into the front of the amp, and then that would go through your preamp section, get distorted. Then it would go through some of your other pedals, especially your time-based effects like reverb and delay, and then finally that goes into the power amp section. The downside to this is, of course, you're going to use twice as many instrument cables, so the setup isn't exactly minimalist. But then again, what about any of this is minimalist? I mean, let's be honest, this is way more involved than it needs to be, and we all know that. So, it's a lot to think about, but it's also just a lot of experimenting and having fun with it. When I'm deciding what order to use on my pedal board, I'm trying to think, what sounds do I want to be able to instantaneously access, and what order do I need to put them in to get those sounds? And of course, sometimes you're gonna have to compromise. I mean, it would be really cool to be able to have an overdrive pedal at the very end to get some overdriven reverb for certain moments of a show, but then that sacrifices all the other uses you're gonna have for your overdrive pedal for the rest of the show. So you just have to make those decisions. Of course, in a recording situation, you have all the freedom in the world, and you should definitely take advantage of that and move pedals around all the time to get exactly the sound that you want for every moment of every song. I think it's a great idea to occasionally shake up the order that you've been using, especially if you've only landed on that particular order because it's the supposedly correct way to do it. Honestly, even just in the course of making this video, I've tried some different things that I've never tried before just because I just never bothered to do it. So I highly encourage you to rip up your pedal board, try new things, and just see what happens. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and if you did, please consider giving it a like and/or subscribing and/or sharing it with your friends or on nerdy guitar forums. I really love making these videos, but this channel is not big enough yet to be monetized, so I really appreciate any help along the way of reaching that goal. And if you'd like to support this channel in an even more direct way and get access to a bunch of random quasi-educational videos that I make, as I mentioned before, I also have a Patreon page which you can subscribe to at patreon.com/ChrisMcQueen. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.